Chapter 46 Bhagavan's Grace. At first glance, the relationship between Muruganar and Bhagavan might not appear intimate. Luckily for us, Muruganar has recorded many of his experiences in the form of beautiful poems. One such poem recounts the following incident. In the early days, very few devotees stayed with Bhagavan. However, Bhagavan was seldom totally alone. Muruganar had a strong desire to have Bhagavan wholly to himself, at least for a short while. Muruganar never mentioned this yearning to anybody. But can anybody hide anything from Bhagavan? Muruganar's secret wish was fulfilled in a totally unexpected way. In those days, Bhagavan and his devotees used to collect leaves from the trees in the forest to make leaf plates. Once, while a party was getting ready to go into the forest, Bhagavan gave Muruganar a very significant glance. Interpreting this look as a signal to follow him, Muruganar hurried after Bhagavan. By the time the others entered the forest, Bhagavan and Muruganar had disappeared into the woods. Bhagavan led Muruganar deep into the forest. At one place, Bhagavan sat down on a log and asked Muruganar to sit beside him. Muruganar sat, but no words were exchanged. Bhagavan looked directly into his eyes and Muruganar felt the power of Bhagavan's grace flowing through him like an electric current. He lost all perceptions of time and space and experienced joy beyond description. Immersed in the state of bliss, Muruganar was oblivious to the passage of time. It was only when he regained his senses that he realized that he must have remained in the state of bliss for hours together. Muruganar has mentioned this incident in one of the poems in the section titled Kirti Thiru in Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai. This verse expresses Muruganar's gratitude to Bhagavan for giving him this experience of blissful union with the self. Bhagavan himself has corroborated Muruganar's account of this incident. Once, Viswanatha Swami was trying to write a poem. However hard he tried, he was unable to think of anything beyond the phrase Mugavapuri Murugan, and he abandoned the attempt. Bhagavan picked up the same phrase and wrote a verse. Viswanatha Swami saw that Bhagavan had composed a beautiful poem which read as follows. That Arunachala Ramana, who dwells in the hot lotus, smiled at me and fixed his intent gaze upon me. Through this look of grace, he totally destroyed my ego and filled my soul with joy. Saying this, Mugavapuri Murugan set about the task of composing Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai, which matches the Ashtakam in its power to confer salvation on all mankind. Muruganar recounts another anecdote in the same Kirti Thiru of Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai. He used to stay in Palakuttu and go into Tiruvannamalai town every morning to beg for alms. Sometimes he would feel disinclined to undertake this trip into town, and on those days he simply went without food. On several occasions, Muruganar fasted for an entire day. One of these days happened to be the Sivaratri day, though Muruganar himself was not aware of the fact. The next morning, Bhagavan asked Muruganar to go around the hill with him. Muruganar set off enthusiastically enough, but soon he started feeling the effects of the previous day's starvation. When Bhagavan saw Muruganar's exhaustion, he exclaimed, "Oh, did you fast yesterday for Sivaratri? See how tired you are now. All right, now come to the ashram with me and have a proper meal." Bhagavan took Muruganar to the ashram and saw to it that he got enough to eat, instructing the attendants to serve Muruganar with particular care. Muruganar was so moved by Bhagavan's solicitude that even after many years, he could not talk about this incident without tears in his eyes. Chapter 47 Liberation to Puja. The Mathrubhuteshwara temple, though not particularly large in size, is remarkable for the beauty of its sculptures. It also serves as a model of perfection in that it has been constructed with strict adherence to the time-honored rules governing temple architecture. The Sri Chakra installed in the sanctum is an extraordinarily powerful one, and its sanctity is enhanced by the daily rituals which are performed with great devotion and attention to detail. The mortal remains of Bhagavan's mother have been enshrined in this temple, and the Matrabhuteshwara Lingam has been installed on the spot. At first, the temple was a very small one, consisting of just one shrine. Later, other idols were installed and the temple was suitably enlarged. In the early days, the daily ritualistic worship used to be conducted by the devotees in Ramanashram. In those days, there were very few permanent residents in the ashram. Whenever he was unable to find anybody else, Chinnaswami would attend to the puja himself. Once in a while, Chinnaswami would ask Muruganar to conduct the puja. Muruganar could not refuse. Muruganar was a perfectionist, and whatever he did, he would do with wholehearted concentration. While engaged in one activity, however, he became oblivious of everything else. He also lost track of time and would often perform a single activity over and over again any number of times. For example, if he decided to perform the abhishekam or the ritualistic washing of the idols, he would bring pot after pot of water and pour it over the idols. Then he would start scrubbing the idols to remove all the accumulated oil and grease. Once, while Muruganar was busy washing the linga, Bhagavan entered the temple. After watching silently for some time, Bhagavan remarked in tones of amusement, "The way you scrub that linga, it looks as though the entire stone image might disappear within a few days' time." On another occasion, Bhagavan happened to enter the temple just as Muruganar was finishing the day's puja. At the end of the puja, the customary practice is to perform the arati, or the worship of the deity, with lighted lamps and burning camphor. Muruganar placed a lump of camphor on a plate and lighted it and picked up the bell in his left hand and started ringing it. While ringing the bell, he could not perform the arati. He was experiencing difficulty in doing both simultaneously. In consternation, he started mumbling to himself, "I wonder how others manage to recite the mantras, ring the bell with one hand and keep up the circular motion of the arati plate with the other hand all at the same time. It requires such perfect synchronization of activities. I suppose it is a gift that other people possess. I myself can never master this art." At this, Bhagavan teased him, "Oh, your performance is simply amazing. I have been admiring you all this while. How nicely you ring the bell, and the graceful manner in which you perform the arati is simply beyond description." Muruganar was startled to hear Bhagavan's voice, for he had not noticed him entering the temple. When he realized that Bhagavan must have been watching him for a long time, he was thoroughly embarrassed. He said, "Bhagavan, I am not going to perform puja anymore. This is quite beyond my capabilities. I am going to tell Chinnaswami that I just cannot do this." Bhagavan smiled broadly and said, "That is good. Now you have granted liberation to puja." Chapter 48. An Ideal Home Life. In the early days, there were very few permanent residents in the ashram, and the ashram itself was just a simple small affair. In those days, Bhagavan used to work in the kitchen every morning, guiding and assisting the kitchen workers. Bhagavan's intimate devotees treasured these quite early morning hours in the kitchen because of the opportunity to work in close proximity to Bhagavan. One morning, Bhagavan was chopping greens. Muruganar was sitting close to Bhagavan and was engaged in the same task. Bhagavan was recounting anecdotes of his days on the hill. He was talking about the various kinds of herbs found on the hill and about the properties of each kind. He told stories about how he had climbed the tamarind tree and plucked the tender leaves so that the greens granny could cook them for him. He talked about the old lady's amazing knowledge about the properties of every kind of herb that grew upon the hill. Bhagavan recalled that the old lady would say, This leaf is good for your eyesight. This one has cooling properties, and so if you eat it regularly, you need not apply oil on your head to cool your system. This one is very effective as a laxative, and so on. Bhagavan continued, there are several rare herbs to be found on the Arunachala hill. It is said that some of these herbs can wipe out sensation of hunger and thirst, and that sages used to take these herbs so that they could perform penance for years together without being bothered by hunger and thirst. Some of the herbs are supposed to bestow longevity, and it is believed that these helped sages to live for several centuries. There is even a belief that with the help of some herbs, one could acquire the power to transport oneself through space and reach any place of one's choice just by thinking about it. Muruganar was fascinated by Bhagavan's words and completely forgot the work on hand. Bhagavan finished his portion of the job, and with the intention of stacking all the greens together and gathering all the roots into one single heap, he looked at Muruganar's work spot and remarked, "Look at him! He is really very smart. Muruganar, your skill in chopping greens is as striking as your success in running a household." Muruganar's extraordinary domestic skills are of course well known to all of us. Bhagavan's remark jolted Muruganar out of his trance-like state. He looked down at his handiwork. The few stalks he had managed to chop were lying scattered all over the place. The roots were in an even messier state, lying like wounded soldiers on a battlefield. Then he looked at Bhagavan's portion of the work and saw the chopped greens piled up neatly in one place, with the roots in a separate heap. Even the roots had been laid in a neat pile. Not a scrap had been wasted. Nothing was out of place. Muruganar was quite ashamed of himself. As if to add insult to injury, Bhagavan was now making fun of his clumsy attempts at helping in the kitchen. What could poor Muruganar do? He could only think of one form of retaliation. He went out, took a piece of paper, wrote something on it, and left the paper on Bhagavan's sofa. As soon as Bhagavan entered the hall, he picked up the piece of paper and read it. Seeing the smile of amusement as he read, the devotees in the hall asked him what was on the piece of paper. Bhagavan handed the paper to the nearest person and said, "Here, read it yourself." This devotee had not been in the kitchen that morning, and so he had no idea of the incident referred to in the poem. He requested Bhagavan to explain. Bhagavan said, "Muruganar was helping me chop vegetables this morning, and I teased him about his lack of skill in domestic chores. I told him that he chopped the greens with the same efficiency with which he managed his household. In reply to my remarks, he has written this poem. The gist of the poem is, "O Ramana, you are an extraordinarily efficient person. Why don't you marry an equally efficient young lady and set up house? Why should you be wandering around as a mendicant in loincloth, begging food, when you could easily have set up an ideal household?" Verse 863. Chapter 49. The Lizard Devotion. Muruganar regarded Bhagavan with so much reverent awe as loving devotion. To Muruganar, Bhagavan's smallest wish was a command to be carried out without the slightest delay. When in Bhagavan's presence, Muruganar would be sitting with his eyes wide open. He would be so absorbed in his contemplation of Bhagavan's captivating form that he would be unaware of anything else. In fact, whenever Bhagavan happened to look for Muruganar in order to get some writing done, the other devotees would wake Muruganar from his trance and draw his attention to the fact that Bhagavan wanted his assistance. Once, Muruganar had just prostrated to Bhagavan when Bhagavan asked him some question regarding some literary work. Still lying on the floor, Muruganar just lifted up his head alone and answered Bhagavan's query. Only after giving Bhagavan a detailed account of the matter did he get up from the floor. Viswanatha Swami, who was in the hall at the time, was quite amazed by Muruganar's behavior. When Muruganar left the hall, Viswanatha Swami followed him outside and said to Muruganar, "What is this? Your behavior is strange indeed. When Bhagavan speaks to you, do you not have to stand up and listen to him with respectful attention? How can you lie on the floor with your head raised like a lizard while Bhagavan is talking to you?" Muruganar was very much upset when he heard this. In a faltering voice, he said, "You are right. I should not have spoken to Bhagavan while lying on the floor. But when Bhagavan speaks to me, I forget everything else except the fact that Bhagavan is asking me a question and that I should answer it immediately. In the urgency of the moment, I cannot think about whether I am standing, sitting, or lying down. What can I do?" Seeing how deeply upset Muruganar was, Viswanatha Swami realized the depth of his feelings and could not say anything further. However, he couldn't resist the temptation to tease Muruganar for what he termed his lizard devotion. Chapter 50. Seize the Opportunity. In the early days, items of daily use, like tooth powder and medicinal oils, were prepared in the ashram itself. The herbs and other ingredients were available locally, and the devotees were able to obtain everything easily. Bhagavan used to play an active part in the preparation of herbal tonics and medicinal oils. He knew the recipes for all the preparations and has recorded the recipes, specifying the exact quantity of each ingredient to be used in each preparation, together with the method of preparation. Each time some medicinal powder or tonic or herbal oil was prepared in the ashram kitchen, Bhagavan would personally supervise the operation, provide information and guidance also. Once, a particular oil was being prepared. The herbs were measured and mixed according to Bhagavan's instructions, and the mixture was placed on the stove to boil. When the process of preparation was nearing completion, Bhagavan was informed and asked to come and check on it. On his way to the cowshed, Bhagavan came to the kitchen. He found that the oil was ready to be removed from the fire, and so he asked the attendants to place the container on the floor and allow the hot oil to cool. After a while, Bhagavan came back to the kitchen to see to the filtration and storage of the oil. A large vessel was placed on the floor and a white cloth was spread across the mouth of the vessel. Bhagavan held the cloth in place and Muruganar started transferring oil from the cauldron to the vessel using a mug. As the work was going on, Bhagavan was telling Muruganar about the various herbs that had been used in the preparation, about the specific qualities of each herb and the benefits to be derived from the prepared oil. Muruganar was apt to forget everything at the mere sight of Bhagavan. Now, with Bhagavan in such close proximity and talking about such interesting things, Muruganar was totally lost. He forgot all about his surroundings and the work he was supposed to be doing. His mind was totally engrossed in Bhagavan's words, but his hands mechanically continued the task of pouring oil from one vessel into the other. The vessel was full, but Muruganar did not notice that. Bhagavan, however, was alert as ever and said, "Look out! The vessel is full. Didn't you notice?" At Bhagavan's words, Muruganar was jolted back to his senses, but not quickly enough. In his confusion, he poured one more mug of oil into the vessel and it promptly overflowed. Muruganar was dismayed to see the oil streaming along the floor. Bhagavan laughed at the bewildered expression on his face and said to him, "Don't let the oil go waste. Who is going to supply you with such a nice herbal oil? Quick, take it and rub it on your scalp. It will do you good." Immediately, Muruganar started scooping up the oil from the floor and rubbing it on his head. He was still in a dazed state and was not fully aware of what he was doing. He knew only that Bhagavan had asked him to take the oil from the floor and apply it on his head. He proceeded to do just that, with his hand traveling mechanically from floor to head and back to the floor. Even after all the oil was gone, he continued repeating the same sequence of actions, with the result that he was now scooping up the mud and rubbing it on his head. Only when Bhagavan burst out laughing, "Hey, I told you to apply only the oil, not the mud," did Muruganar realize what he was doing. With a shamefaced look, he finally stopped. All the while Sri Bhagavan was holding the cloth, and it did not occur to Muruganar that he should help Bhagavan remove the cloth from the vessel. Finally, Subbalakshmi Ammal, who was doing some work in the kitchen, had to relieve Bhagavan and finish the job on hand. While Muruganar was teaching me the works of Bhagavan, he used to quote extensively from the scriptures and other ancient texts. In the course of one of these sessions, Muruganar said to me, "The ancient texts tell us about the incidents that took place in previous ages. Everything that happens during our own lifetime we regard as current news. Those incidents that took place in the past but within a certain time frame we classify as history. When we hear accounts of what took place in even earlier times, we are unable to believe the authenticity of those accounts. Yet, at the time those events occurred, they too must have been current events." Vedavyasa, the author of the Mahabharata, has talked about our present age, Kali Yuga. In the Srimad Bhagavata, Vyasa has clearly stated that during the Kali Yuga, human beings can attain liberation through very easy means like chanting of the divine names and the proximity of realized souls. In the Arunachala Mahatmyam, we find the declaration that the mere sight of the Arunachala hill is enough to grant liberation. Further, it states that if one is unable to go to Arunachala, one just has to think of Arunachala with sincere devotion, and the thought alone is sufficient to bestow liberation. In ancient times like the Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, liberation could be attained only through rigorous penance and unswerving devotion to one's Guru. But we, in this Kali Yuga, are assured of liberation through much easier practices. Are we not in an enviably fortunate position? We now have difficulty in believing that the incidents recorded in the ancient books are authentic. In the same way, in coming ages, people are likely to find it difficult to believe the accounts of Sri Bhagavan's life and teachings. That the young Venkatraman realized the great truth merely by concentrating on the question of what is it that dies, and that he was able to attain self-realization without any formal training or the instructions of a guru. These facts are certainly too wonderful to be readily believed. It is certain that in future ages, saints and sages will tell the story of Sri Ramana Maharshi to their disciples, and those disciples will listen with the same awe and wonder with which we listen to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata now. Even as he spoke these words, Muruganar's eyes filled with tears and his voice became hoarse with emotion. We can certainly say that just as Bhagavan's life and teachings are sure to provide future generations with inspiration, Muruganar's devotion to Bhagavan will also serve as an enduring model for ages to come. Chapter 51. Massage That Pillar. Venkataratnam was one of Bhagavan's personal attendants. He was a young graduate with quite unassuming manners. He was very devoted to Bhagavan. He was a bachelor and had dedicated himself to Bhagavan's service. In those days, visitors took up Bhagavan's time and attention throughout the daytime. All day long, Bhagavan would be engaged in giving darshan to devotees, in clarifying their doubts, and in giving advice on spiritual matters. But the nights belonged to Bhagavan's personal attendants. The night times can be considered the precious reward for the attendants' day-long labors. It was during the quiet hours of the late evening that Bhagavan lavished all his attention on his attendants. He would tell them interesting stories of the great saints and seers of olden days. He would narrate tales from Periya Puranam, Bhakta Vijayam, etc. Bhagavan had the ability to hold his listeners spellbound. Not only were his descriptions strikingly vivid, Bhagavan would also imitate the words and gestures of characters with the perfection of a gifted actor and mimic. So much so that the listeners found themselves being transported back in time and space, actually living the story that Bhagavan was recounting. Once, Bhagavan was in the hall with a small group of devotees around him. The evening meal was over and the ashram was quiet. Venkataratnam sat at Bhagavan's feet and started massaging Bhagavan's legs to relieve the arthritic pain. One of the devotees said to Bhagavan, "We know that Saint Namadeva was very devoted to Lord Pandarinatha. Yet, Pandarinatha sent him to Jnanadeva for religious instruction. Why is it that the Lord did not directly involve himself with Namadeva's spiritual progress?" In response to this query, Bhagavan told us the following story. One day, Gorakumbha invited Jnanadeva, Namadeva, and a few other holy men to his house. In the course of his conversation with Gorakumbha, Jnanadeva said, "Sir, you are an expert at pottery work. You can easily differentiate between a half-baked pot and a perfectly baked one. Why don't you examine all of us?" Gorakumbha got up and walked along the lines of holy men, tapping each on the head with his knuckles. At this point, Bhagavan acted out the part of Gorakumbha, mimicking the gestures of a person, tapping and listening, then tapping again on the next head. All the devotees were enthralled. Venkataratnam was as engrossed in the story as the rest of the people. In fact, he was so caught up in the story that he had forgotten he was at Ramanashram and had been transported into Gorakumbha's house. He was no longer aware of the task he was supposed to be engaged in. Suddenly, feeling Bhagavan's eyes upon him, Venkataratnam recalled his surroundings and recollected the fact that he was massaging Bhagavan's legs. When he noticed Bhagavan looking at him, Venkataratnam thought, "Bhagavan must have been checking to see whether I am paying attention to the story." Bhagavan continued with his narration. Venkataratnam once again lost himself in the story. Once more, Bhagavan gave Venkataratnam an intent look. The young man was now convinced that he had been shamefully negligent and started pressing Bhagavan's leg with all his strength. Bhagavan went on with his narration, but was forced to stop after a while. He suddenly drew up his legs and said to Venkataratnam, "Look, all that you want is something to press with your hands, is it not? Go and press that pillar. Massage it to your heart's content." Only then did Venkataratnam realize what he had been doing. In his preoccupation with the story, he had been massaging the same spot, pressing into the tender flesh of Bhagavan's calves. As the story became more and more interesting, he had become correspondingly more and more excited and had pressed even harder. The pain must have been severe, and that is why Bhagavan had paused in his narration 2 or 3 times and looked at Venkataratnam. But he was so absorbed in the story that he was totally unaware of his own actions. In fact, he had been so distracted that he had completely misinterpreted Bhagavan's glances. When he realized the extent of his mistake, Venkataratnam was beside himself with remorse. He was thoroughly ashamed of himself. He spent a sleepless night. The next day, Venkataratnam hesitated to go anywhere near Bhagavan. He was afraid that Bhagavan might be displeased with his thoughtless behavior. Being the very embodiment of compassion, Bhagavan could not remain unresponsive to his devotees' heartfelt remorse and regret. Bhagavan himself called Venkataratnam to his side and said to him in a gentle voice, "Why are you feeling so bad? There is no need to feel ashamed of yourself. Anyone in your position would have done exactly what you did. Forget it and don't worry." Bhagavan's gentle tone and his understanding words set Venkataratnam's troubled heart at rest. Chapter 52. Rishabha Vahanam. During Deepam festival days, the deity is decorated beautifully and brought out in procession through the 4 streets around the temple. Each day, Lord Arunachala rides on different mounts. Of these, The great silver Rishabha or sacred bull that bears the Lord on the 5th day of the festival is very special. This silver Rishabha is gigantic in size and unmatched in beauty. The bull appears to be fully conscious of the great privilege that has been bestowed upon it and moves through the streets with a proud look on its radiant face. The temple priests seem to have a special love for this particular ceremonial mount. They decorate it with evident pride in their own artistic creativity. The flower garlands and the huge flower umbrella are made with great attention to detail. Even the bulls that draw the majestic Rishabha, now all the mounts are pulled with tractor, through the streets are bedecked with colorful garlands of beads and flowers. Once, Venkatratnam went to the temple to see the Rishabha Vahana. The procession started a little later than usual because it took a rather long time to install the deity on the back of the huge Rishabha. The procession itself was an engrossing affair with Nagaswara experts playing sweet music and with spectacular firework displays at every street corner. By the time the procession had covered the entire route and returned to the temple, it was quite late. So Venkataratnam did not go back to the ashram but spent the rest of the night in a friend's house. Next morning, he went to the ashram and resumed his regular duties. As soon as Bhagavan saw him, he asked, "You were not here last night. Did you go to the temple?" Venkataratnam said, "Yes, Bhagavan." He would have stopped with that, had not Bhagavan exclaimed, "Is not the Rishabha Vahanam a grand sight?" This encouraged Venkataratnam to give a more detailed account of his experiences. He enthusiastically described the Rishabha and the elaborate decorations. "Bhagavan, the Rishabha is so huge and its appearance is so majestic. Oh, what lovely garlands it wore on its neck, and what a grand flower umbrella it bore. Even the bulls that drew the carriage were beautifully decorated. What colorful garlands they had on their necks! They even had multicolored balloons tied to their horns." Bhagavan said, Yes, everything would have been very grand yesterday. There must have been an extraordinarily large garland of flowers also. Did you notice that?" Venkataratnam replied, "Yes, Bhagavan, it was enormous. They say that it is made especially for the Lord to wear on the 5th day of the festival. Do you know, Bhagavan, the priests had to climb up a ladder just to place the garland around the deity? In addition to all this, there were colored bulbs strung around the head and the sides of the Rishabha. With the twinkling lights and the colorful garlands, not to mention the glittering ornaments, the Rishabha Vahana was indeed a grand sight." Bhagavan interrupted the excited flow of words with a question. "Where were you standing? Could you see everything clearly from where you stood?" Venkataratnam said, "It was terribly crowded, Bhagavan. It would have been impossible to see everything from the same spot. At first, I watched from within the mandapam. Then, I moved to the corner beside the peanut stall. When the Rishabha came out of the temple and turned the corner, I had a clear view. What a splendid sight it was, and the fireworks were superb. What dazzling brilliance and what ear-splitting explosions! It is impossible to describe it all in words. No wonder that it is famous all over India. No wonder such a huge crowd had gathered to witness it. The crowd was like a surging sea. It was so difficult to get out of it in one piece." Having listened to all this, Bhagavan asked, "You have said so much about the crowd and the decorations and everything else, but you have not said a single word about Arunachala himself. Well, how was he?" Venkataratnam replied, "All the elaborate preparations and the spectacular arrangements were for him, were they not? Everything is for him alone." Bhagavan said, "You said that the garland was huge. You said so much about the intricate patterns on the flower umbrella. You said the carriage was drawn by bulls, and you even described the garlands around the bulls' necks. But you have not talked about Arunachala at all. That is why I asked. Maybe you feel that it is not necessary to talk about him. After all, he is always the same, is he not? Perhaps That is why you did not mention him at all." Only then did poor Venkataratnam realize that Bhagavan had been teasing him deliberately. Bhagavan had encouraged, questioned, and provoked him into giving such an impassioned account of the previous night's experiences. Venkataratnam had obligingly talked at length about all the other details, but had forgotten all about Arunachala. Bhagavan's query jolted Venkataratnam out of his absorption in the inessential details and made him realize that he had allowed the inessential details to take up all his attention, thus distracting him from the essential. Even though Bhagavan appeared to be just having some fun at Venkataratnam's expense, there was actually a very important lesson underlying it all. It is a lesson all of us should learn, because every one of us at some time or the other makes the same mistake as Venkataratnam. We often allow the inessential and the ephemeral to take up all our attention, thereby losing sight of the one everlasting truth. Bhagavan often taught the most profound truths through apparently light-hearted remarks. Chapter 53. Why leave Madurai at all? Once, a young man came to the ashram. He was about 20 years old. He entered the Jubilee Hall and made his way through the crowd of devotees to stand before Bhagavan with folded hands. Bhagavan looked at the youth with a gracious smile. The young man asked, "Bhagavan, while one is engaged in Nama Japa or chanting of God's name, is it better to say Rama or Krishna, or could one combine both and say Ramakrishna?" Bhagavan replied, "Every name is equally potent. You can chant any name singly or in combination. Whether you say Rama, Krishna or Ramakrishna, the effect is the same. What is important is the degree of mental concentration you're able to achieve and sustain." Next, the youth asked, "Is it all right to do such japam in one's house itself, or is it necessary to leave home and go to an ashram or some secluded spot?" Bhagavan said, "There's no need to leave your home and look for a suitable spot. Spiritual practices can be carried out wherever convenient. Your house is as good a place as any other." Then he asked, "If that is so, then why did Bhagavan leave Madurai and come to Tiruvannamalai? Was not Madurai a good enough place?" Bhagavan sat up and said, "So, this is what you have in mind, is it? You're wondering why I should have left home if one place is really as good as any other place. But you should note one thing. I did not go around asking people, should I stay here or should I go somewhere else? I just did what I felt like doing. If you also have a strong feeling that you should leave home, why don't you do so? If your conviction is strong enough, you will not feel the need for other people's approval or support." The young man appeared to be at a loss for words. The young man stood silently for a few moments and then left the hall. After the youth left the place, Bhagavan said to the devotees around, "This boy has no confidence or courage to face the consequences. He is afraid that if he were to leave the security of his home, he might not be able to fend for himself. It is only the weak-minded people who go around asking for other people's advice. The strong-willed ones just do what their heart says is right. Such strength of character is a God-given gift. Total self-reliance is not possible without His grace." Chapter 54. Varanasi Subbalakshmi Ammal. Varanasi Subbalakshmi Ammal was a devotee of Bhagavan. She hailed from the Nellore district of Andhra Pradesh. She was widowed at a very young age and lost all interest in worldly matters. She decided to dedicate herself to spiritual pursuits and spent all her time engaged in reading philosophical books and in Nama Japa and meditation. As a young girl, Subbalakshmi Ammal had come to Tiruvannamalai with her mother when Bhagavan was staying in Virupaksha cave. When she was about 31 years old, she again came on her way back from Rameswaram, where she had gone with a group of people. When she reached Tiruvannamalai, she remembered her earlier visit and was eager to see Bhagavan again. She made enquiries and learned that Bhagavan had settled in the present ashram. The group came to Ramanashram and sat in the meditation hall for some time. Then they all took leave of Bhagavan and proceeded on their pilgrimage. On her third visit, she stayed in Bhagavan's presence for half a day and did Giri Pradakshinam before leaving for Kalahasti. That night, she dreamt that a priest of her acquaintance came to her and told her, "Tiruvannamalai is the right place for you. Bhagavan Sri Ramana, the Omniscient One, will show you the way to liberation. Go to him and surrender." She felt that the dream was a message from God. So she came back to Tiruvannamalai and took a house for rent. Now, it was possible for her to visit Ramanashram regularly. She often discussed her spiritual aspirations with Bhagavan, and he graciously cleared her doubts and guided her. The ashram authorities invited her to come and stay in the ashram, but she was unwilling due to her orthodoxy. Once, it so happened that Shantammal was left to manage all the work in the ashram kitchen. At that time, Chinnaswami requested Subbalakshmi Ammal to help out. Subbalakshmi Ammal readily agreed and was amply rewarded for her generosity because Bhagavan spent a lot of time guiding and advising those in the kitchen. Subbalakshmi Ammal was an avid reader. Once, while reading Bhakta Vijayam, she came across a passage that stated Lord Panduranga used to dine with the saint Namadeva, and that Namadeva conversed with the Lord as with a friend. Subbalakshmi Ammal was very much impressed and waited for an opportunity to ask Bhagavan about this. One morning, just after breakfast, Bhagavan was sitting in the dining hall. There was no one else nearby. Subbalakshmi Ammal seized the opportunity. She went up to Bhagavan with a glass of hot water. Giving him the glass, she stood before Bhagavan and asked, "Bhagavan, it is said that Namadeva used to talk freely with Lord Panduranga and that the Lord would sit next to Namadeva and eat with him, just like a friend. Is it really possible for anybody to be on such intimate terms with God? Is it true that God was actually there in human form?" Bhagavan looked at her and said, "Yes, that is what is written in the book, and whatever the book says is as true as the fact that you and I are now here and conversing with each other. If this is real, then the statements made in the book are real too. If this is unreal, then the claims made in the book are also unreal. Everything depends upon the imagination. Once a devotee becomes absorbed in the self, he stops thinking of God as being separate from himself. But until he reaches such a state, one must keep his faith alive. God has to grant the devotees every prayer to coax him to stay on the path of self-realization. Once realization is attained, the devotee loses his sense of individuality and merges with the Supreme Being. Now he knows that everything is but a manifestation of the self. All her doubts disappeared when she heard Bhagavan's clear and precise explanation. She felt that her mind had gained a greater clarity. Chapter 55. Singular Taste. The Bose compound, or Mahasthan, is situated opposite to the Palakuttu, close to Ramanashram. This was built by Aravind Bose, one of Bhagavan's devotees. Bose's mother was very old. In spite of her age and infirmity, the lady visited the ashram every day and spent some time with Bhagavan and his devotees. Ammal and Mudaliyar party used to bring food for Bhagavan every day. Seeing this, Bose's mother developed the desire to cook something herself and offer it to Bhagavan. For a while she hesitated to tell Bhagavan about this, but eventually she found the courage to inform Bhagavan of her intentions. Bhagavan tried to dissuade the old lady, saying, "There is no need for all that. There are people to take care of these details. You are older than I am. Why should you strain yourself unnecessarily? It is enough that you come here every day and spend your time with all of us." But the lady was determined to have her way. So she went to the ashram office and somehow managed to obtain permission to bring food for Bhagavan and his devotees the next day. She prepared a number of dishes, and with the help of a servant boy, she brought all the food to the ashram kitchen to serve Bhagavan with her own hands. Bhagavan entered the hall and sat down in his customary place. The lady served Bhagavan with her own hands. As she served each item, she told Bhagavan all about the preparation and the specific benefits that particular item could bestow upon the body. After she had served each item on Bhagavan's plate, the ashram attendants took the vessel and served all the other people in the dining hall, as she was too old to do so herself. Bhagavan gave the signal for everybody to start eating. He then mixed all the items on his plate and started eating. This was always Bhagavan's practice. He never tasted each item separately or expressed any preferences or dislike for anything. This particular day, Bhagavan saw that the old lady had brought a large variety of dishes and had carefully served each item separately on his plate. Looking at a devotee who was nearby, Bhagavan said, "You know Hindi, do you not? Please tell this lady that there is no need for her to take so much trouble. At her age, it must have been a great strain making so many different items. Poor thing. She might have expected me to appreciate each item. But I never taste each item separately. I do not require variety. My taste is singular. All I need is the one. Please tell this lady not to put herself to so much trouble in future." Bhagavan often used the most ordinary situations to illustrate lofty ideas. Once during lunch, Subbalakshmi was trying to coax him to take a second helping of vegetable stew. She said, "Bhagavan does not eat anything that is hot and spicy. This stew is bland in taste. Please let me serve a little more of it." Bhagavan was not convinced, however. He said, "You have already served some of it on my plate. Is that not enough? Do I have to eat everything with this one mouth alone? Am I not partaking of every item through so many mouths? What more is required?" Though this remark was made in a casual manner, it serves as an illustration of Bhagavan's infiniteness. His total absorption in the self resulted in his recognition of the many as no more than illusory aspects of the one. Chapter 56. Life is governed by prarabdha. Once, Bhagavan and his devotees were discussing Jnanachara Vichara Padalam in Devi Kalotram in collected works. The discussion was mainly about the idea expressed in one particular verse, namely, the idea of total detachment of the mind from the physical body. Bhagavan said, "Our acts of commission and omission in past lives determine the course of this present life. The physical body has to go through certain preordained experiences. Once it has undergone the experiences ordained for that particular lifetime, the body drops off automatically. There is no need for a person to feel frustrated about the difficulties in taking care of the body. At the same time, there is no need to become anybody's slave just to ensure nourishment for the body. Then, how is the body to be nourished?" He then proceeded to narrate the following story to illustrate this point. Hiranyakasipu was the king of the Asuras or demons. Hiranyakasipu's son Prahalada was, however, far from being demonic in nature. Prahalada, from his earliest days, was chanting the potent mantra Om Namo Narayanaya. The demon king had subjugated all the gods and demigods, but he was powerless to stop his own son from chanting the divine name. The demon king was furious because his son insisted upon singing the praises of his own deadly enemy, Lord Narayana, but could not do anything about it. When it was time for Prahalada to go to school, Hiranyakasipu called Chandamarkan, who ran the royal school, and ordered him, "My son has somehow developed the habit of chanting the name of my enemy. It is your duty to persuade him to give up that practice and to make him chant Om Namo Hiranyakashyapaya instead." Chandamarga took the young prince to his school in the forest with the royal command ringing in his ears. Early the next morning, all the pupils gathered in the schoolroom. As soon as their teacher arrived, all the students stood up for the morning prayers. Prahalada got up with others. Chandamarka led his students in chanting Om Namo Hiranyakashyapaya. But a lone voice intoned Om Namo Narayanaya. Chandamarka took the young prince by the hand, led him away from the other boys, and spoke to him gently. "My dear child, you must not chant that name in this place. This is the realm of the demons, and as you know, your father is the all-powerful king of the demons. Narayana is your father's sworn enemy. Any mention of his enemy's name will only enrage your father. Please join the other students in this show of loyalty to the king of the land. It will please your father greatly if you learn to chant Om Namo Hiranyakashyapaya." Prahalada listened to his teacher in total silence. Chandamarga took Prahalada's silence as a sign of approval and agreement. He was quite sure that he had succeeded in convincing the young prince. But Prahalada continued to chant the name of Lord Narayana. Not only did Prahalada refuse to change his ways, he even managed to convert the other students to his own way of thinking. There was something irresistibly attractive about the young prince, and the other boys just could not stay away from him. Whenever their teacher was away from the schoolroom, the other children would gather around Prahalada. He would tell them about the greatness of Narayana and teach them to chant his name. On his return to the classroom, Chandamarka was astounded by the sight of all the children chanting Om Namo Narayanaya in unison. He knew that he could not do anything with Prahalada, but he believed that the other children would be easier to deal with. So he said to the other boys, "Soon you must go out into the world and earn your livelihood. How can you prosper in life if the king is displeased with you? By disobeying the royal command, you will surely earn the wrath of the king, and that will ruin your prospects in life." Nevertheless, they could not resist the charm of Prahalada. The next time the teacher was away from the class, the boys again gathered around Prahalada. When he asked them to chant the name of Narayana, one of the bolder boys protested, saying, "It is all very well for you to disregard the king's commands. You are the prince of this land, and so you need not worry about making a living. But we are not like that. We will lose our livelihood. Knowing this, why do you ask us to disobey the king?" Prahalada smiled at the boy and said, "Did you come into the world with the king's permission? Does the king really have power over your life? You did not enter this world at the king's command. You were born so that you could fulfill the decrees of fate. Even before you were born, the entire course of your life was determined to the smallest detail. King Hiranyakasipu has power only in this land, whereas Lord Narayana rules the entire universe. We have come into the world again and again in order to experience the fruits of our past deeds. The only way to break the chains of fate is to gain the favor of Narayana. He alone has the power to free you from all bondage. Devote your life to earning His grace so that you can be free forever." Chapter 57. The White Peacock. Some devotees believe that Bhagavan was the incarnation of Lord Subramanya. Many incidents in Bhagavan's life seem to substantiate this belief. Lord Muruga's mount is a peacock. Sri Ramanashram is full of peacocks, and Bhagavan was often surrounded by these beautiful birds. As is usual, Bhagavan was always especially gracious to the peacocks. He always kept some tasty tidbits for them and fed them lovingly whenever they chose to visit him. The ashram peacocks seemed to know that they were specially privileged birds and would strut about as though they owned the place. While Bhagavan was in the Jubilee Hall, the peacocks were very happy because they could approach Bhagavan from any direction at any time. It was a common sight in the ashram for a peacock to pick its way through the crowd of devotees to receive a fruit or nut from Bhagavan's hands. The peacocks were on such intimate terms with Bhagavan that it often seemed like they knew his daily routine perfectly and arranged their own activities accordingly. When Bhagavan went to the cowshed in the morning, a peacock would be waiting for him by the side of the path. When Bhagavan caught sight of the peacock, he would stand still and gaze at the bird. It would also gaze back. After a while, the bird would turn and go away as though satisfied with the meeting. To us, it seemed as though some sublime communication had taken place between Bhagavan and the bird. In 1947, the Maharani of Baroda sent a white peacock to Ramanashram. Bhagavan observed, "The other peacocks are indeed beautiful, with their brilliant colouring and their spectacular feathers, but this white peacock has a unique beauty of its own. Its white feathers seem to be a symbol of purity." From the time the white peacock arrived in the ashram, Bhagavan made it a point to sleep in the Jubilee Hall. A cage was erected next to Bhagavan's stone couch, and the white peacock stayed in this enclosure through the night time. All the other peacocks roosted in the trees throughout the night and came into the hall at the crack of dawn to see Bhagavan. The white peacock alone had the unique privilege of staying near Bhagavan all through the night. Soon it was winter, and Bhagavan's personal attendants felt that it would be advisable to shift Bhagavan's bed into the hall. As Bhagavan sometimes had asthmatic attacks, the attendants were concerned about the effect of the cold breezes upon his health. But when they requested Bhagavan to move into the hall, he refused. No amount of persuasion could convince him to change his mind. Bhagavan said, "The white peacock has come to us from a faraway place. He might not be quite comfortable in these surroundings. How can I abandon him and seek comfort for myself alone? When a guest comes to our house, would it be proper to make him sleep outside while we ourselves occupied the bedroom? The right thing to do would be to offer the guest all comforts. If that is not possible, we should at least refrain from enjoying all the comforts ourselves. The most courteous thing to do would be to share the veranda with your guest." Many of Bhagavan's devotees believed that Madhavaswami, an attendant who had served Bhagavan faithfully for many years, was reborn as the white peacock. Bhagavan too addressed the white peacock as Madhava. G.V. Subbaramaya, one of Bhagavan's devotees, was so struck by the extraordinary relationship between Bhagavan and the white peacock that he composed a poem titled Sweta Mayura Ashtakam. Bhagavan read the 8 stanzas, gave the poem to Lalita Venkatraman and asked her to play the verses on her veena. Lalita studied the poem and prepared to set the tune to play on the veena. Just as she was about to start playing, Bhagavan exclaimed, "Wait! The hero of the poem is not here. We should get him here to listen to the song which had been composed in his honor." So saying, Bhagavan raised his voice and called, "Madhava, where are you?" Immediately the peacock flew down from the roof of the hall and stood before his master. Bhagavan's face shone like the full moon at this. The lady started singing the verses and playing the veena. As soon as she started singing, the peacock spread its tail and started dancing. It continued to dance all the while she sang. As soon as she stopped playing, The peacock went up to her and pecked at the strings of the veena. Bhagavan laughed at the peacock's antics and said to Lalita, "Madhavan wants you to repeat the singing." She immediately started singing once again. This time also the peacock danced through the performance. It was truly thrilling experience for all of us.
ఏమైనా కాని మిమునే విడువనంచుల్ స్వామినటు వీడిచని స్వాత్మ గురు సేవా కామిత మహిళ తనువు కైకొనినయ్యా స్వామి ఒక పల్కుమ సంసిత మయూరా. సాధుకమశీలుడై స్వామి పద సేవా మాధురుడు ద్రోలుచును విధి కుంపో. సాధుతమశీలుడై స్వామి పద సేవా మాధురుడు గ్రోలుచును మంద విధి కుంపో. నీ ధరణి శ్రీరమణునే మరల చేర మాధవుడవో పలుకు మాసిత మయూరా. నిజంకుడయు గొంకుడయు లేకే పెద్దనము చేసెదవు ప్రీతి నిడనెందు పొద్దముల చక్కనిడ పూనెదవు నీకి భక్తి ఎటు వచ్చెనొక పల్కవే మయూరా. నీ కళయు నీ చలవు నీ నడక నీటున్ నీ కొడుకు నీ తడుకు నీ బెళుకుగాల్చ నాకమిడడి కినటనంచెలు పులీలన్ మా కనులు చొక్కును సుమాసిత మయూరా. ఘనకారుణిమతొల్కన్ వారకయునర్చు భగవానులు సమీక్షన్ తోరపు కుతూహలముతో నిను వచించన్ శ్రీరమణునాశ్రమపు శ్రీ వీరమయూరా. నాణ్యముగనభ్రముగనాట్యమటు స్వల్ప వీణనినదమ్ము వినవేగ పరువెత్తన్ నాణ్యముగనభ్రముగనాట్యమటు స్వల్ప శోణగిరి శ్రీరమణు శుద్ధమతిహత్త వాణి అవతారమవనందగు మయూరా. सत्त्वगुणतेजमिटु साकृतिगवचन् तत्त्वमसि वाक्यमिटु धावलिमदाल्चन् सत्त्वगुणतेजमिटु साकृतिगवचन् तत्त्वमसि वाक्यमिटु धावलिमदाल्चन् स्वत्वमौनीव भगवानुलघु सम्पूर्णत्वमुननीव पुरासितमयूरा ఎందరుణశైలమిది ఎందది బరోడా అందు జనించియు మహర్షినిటు చేరన్ ఎందరుణశైలమిది ఎందది బరోడా అందు జనించి మహర్షినిటు చేరన్ స్కందుని మయూరమో చంద్రని భగాత్ర వందనము నీకు భగవాను ప్రియపుత్ర
On one occasion, when the white peacock was walking around the hall freely, without showing any signs of timidity among so many people, a devotee remarked, "Surely, this bird must have been closely associated with this place in its last birth. Otherwise, would it be possible for any bird to mingle so freely with people, forgetting its natural timidity?" Bhagavan said, "You are right. This bird really is extraordinary in its behavior. That is why everybody here says that this peacock must be Madhavan." The devotee asked, "Does that mean that the bird actually remembers its past life?" To this, Bhagavan replied, No, that is not possible. It is difficult enough to deal with the troubles and worries of one life at a time. How can anyone survive the strain of all the conflicting thoughts and emotions of a series of lives? It is true that the experiences of each lifetime are determined by the actions performed in previous lives. But nobody remembers the details of his past lives. God, in His mercy, has blessed us with forgetfulness or tirobhavam, the divine illusion through concealment. The white peacock's attachment to Bhagavan was certainly remarkable. During the last hours of Bhagavan's life in the body, the peacock sat on the roof of the Nirvana room and rent the air with its plaintive cries. The bird's mournful cries were an expression of its anguish and sorrow, so full of feeling as to melt the hardest heart. Bhagavan often remarked that great souls could appear in our midst in unexpected garbs. If someone was unkind to an animal or a bird, Bhagavan would chide him, saying, "One can never tell what kind of a soul inhabits the body of any creature. So it is very important to be courteous and kind to all creatures on this earth." Chapter 58. The Self-Unaware of the Body. Sri Ramanashram attracted all kinds of visitors. Human beings were only a part of the gathering around Bhagavan. The rest of the gathering consisted of cows, birds, dogs, monkeys, squirrels, and other creatures. Sometimes these other visitors enjoyed a much more intimate relationship with Bhagavan than any human being could hope for. Bhagavan's consideration for his animal devotees, his concern for their welfare, his gentleness while dealing with animals, and his sympathy for them, all this could very well fill a human heart with envious longing. Sri Muruganar has mentioned this in his Prarthanai Pattu, wherein he sings, "Oh, let me be born as a dog in Ramanashramam, than to aspire for heavenly kingdom." Sri Ramana Sannidhi Murai, verse 136. In the early days of my stay at Arunachala, the temple elephant would pass the ashram on its way to the Arunachala temple. The mahout would lead it in, and the elephant would receive some food from the ashram kitchen. Then it would go to greet Bhagavan with a loud trumpeting call and a salute before proceeding on its trek to the temple. Once, a youth from America was taking photographs of all the interesting spots in and around the ashram. While he was walking around the grounds with his camera, he caught sight of Bhagavan and the temple elephant standing together near the Jubilee Hall. Bhagavan was overseeing the feeding of the elephant, talking to it in gentle tones. The young American captured the moment on film. After a few days, he left the ashram and returned to America. Soon afterwards, he sent us a copy of the photograph he had taken. At the back of the photo, the young man had written, "A great body unaware of its soul, standing next to a great soul unaware of its body." Nagammal wanted to know what the caption actually meant. Bhagavan smiled at us and said, "You see, the elephant is so large that it has to have large quantities of food to sustain itself. Maybe the American boy feels that in its preoccupation with trying to find enough food, the elephant cannot possibly find much time for soul-searching thoughts. So he says it is a great body which has not realized its soul. You have all seen how I stumble and struggle to walk straight. Perhaps that's why the boy says that I have no awareness of my body." A devotee remarked, "That is true. Bhagavan always appears to be totally unaware of his physical body." Bhagavan responded with a smile and the remark, "Various people say various things. One person says that I am like Lord Dakshinamurti. Another compares me to Lord Dandapani or Lord Subramanya because I always have my staff or dandam with me." One of the devotees then said, "It is said that Jadabarda also had no awareness of his body. Is it because of this that he came to be known as Jadabarda?" Bhagavan replied, "Yes, of course. The ignorant might think that the term Jadabarata was applied to a man because he was inert and immobile, like an inanimate object. That is wrong. The real meaning of the word in this context is one who had no awareness of his physical body but established fully in the Atman. I mentioned this incident to Sri Kunjaswami once. He was reminded of another incident. Bhagavan was rather unsteady on his feet even in his younger days. His head and his body would shake, making it necessary for Bhagavan to use a cane to support himself. Once, when Sri Kunjaswami happened to find himself alone with Bhagavan, he asked, "Bhagavan, what causes your head and body to shake so much? Usually, such infirmities are seen only in the case of very old people. Why should Bhagavan be so afflicted at such a young age?" Bhagavan responded to this with a mischievous smile, saying, "What do you think would happen if you left a huge elephant tied up in a small hut? Would not the elephant's every movement make the fragile hut tremble and shake? That is what is happening here also." With this seemingly simple remark, Bhagavan had acknowledged the fact that his body was no more than a frail frame enclosing an unimaginably great spirit. Bhagavan never seemed to be bothered by his physical infirmity. He joked about his own condition, saying, "All of you have only 2 legs each. I am the only one who has 3 legs."